Hello, this is Eric, aka Wolfbitten, and with me is Leigh Hunt, and we are going to have a little bit of a discussion. And Leigh is an atheist who's going to defend his belief system. So, thank you very much, Leigh, for joining me. And
Hey.
discussion and debate, atheism, evolution, Bible study, prophecy and doctrine, social issues, and everything Christian. These are hot topics with your host Eric, aka Wolfbitten. Welcome. Okay, and thank you everybody who's going to be listening to this. Thank you for listening. And when you give your comments, give Leigh a little love in your comments, and we'll appreciate that. Now, let me explain, Leigh, my position, and then we'll talk about yours. I believe that what the atheist believes in is, and I don't mean anything personal by this, but I believe that it boils down to absurdities, because the atheist is forced to believe in things that are never observed. Let me give you an example of this. For instance, when it comes to the question of how did life develop in the universe, we're left with two possibilities, pretty much, and only two. The theist, of course, believes in creation, but the atheist, on the other hand, has to embrace abiogenesis as a cause for life, because we basically have no third cause. Now, when it comes to abiogenesis, we don't really observe that in nature, and so it seems to be an unnatural thing. How would you answer that? I'm sorry, but Leigh, you're not coming through at all. You're very garbled, and
Okay. How about now?
that's a little bit better.
Okay, so you started off with the atheist must believe, and I disagree with that right off the top, right? So I speak for myself, this one atheist, because atheists are just anyone that does not believe in a God, and I disagree with a lot of them on a lot of things. And so then you said we're stuck believing, certain things. We only have two options. I've actually heard some way far out options from atheists and theists alike that are outside of those two options. I do believe in abiogenesis because I believe there was a time in this universe where there was no life, and we can observe that there is life now. And I believe that a lot of theists believe that too, because they believe there was no life and then their God created life. So there was no life coming from non-life.
Well, that's not the case. I'll explain the difference. You
Sure.
see, biogenesis is a real science.
Right. Hold on a sec. I know what biogenesis is. So I did study biology, right? So I know what it is, but I think really it's about terminology, right? Because I'm using the very broad term, life from non-life. So there's no life, God creates it, now there's life. There's no life, natural process occurs, now there's life. In both cases, there was no life, and now there's life. That's all I'm
But
saying.
the difference is life coming from God. God would be a living creature. God
Okay.
would be a life who brings forth life. Therefore, we have the non-exception to biogenesis being observed there.
Fair enough. Well, you know what, Eric? I'll just accept that right off the top. Like, God
Okay,
is life, so what you believe in is not abiogenesis. I am
right.
corrected.
Okay. Now,
So, yeah.
abiogenesis, you said that you do believe that there's third options, but you do believe in abiogenesis, right?
Yeah. So, I'm going to go back to, our current presentation of the universe. I don't know if it's the beginning, but it's expanding from a very dense, very hot point. Um, this could be everything, could be the beginning of everything. It could have come out of a metaverse, which I will not even support or, claim. It could be clapping, expanding, and over and over. I don't know. I'm not a cosmologist, but what we're dealing with, right? We can see redshift. We know galaxies are moving away from each other. Uh, it's expanding. At some point, it was too hot. It was too hot even for atoms or protons, even, right? So life could not exist in that situation unless it was so alien, something that we found in Star Trek, some kind of energy being. And I'm not going to entertain that without evidence, right? So I'm going to say there was no life. And at some point, things started to cool off and spread out. And we got stars and solar systems and planets with water and life, sprung up. Self-replicating molecules, lipids making membranes, things like that, until you had something that was not even a cell, not even a prion, right? Something more primitive than that. And I don't know what that is.
Okay, so do you agree that which we observe in nature is what we can call natural?
Yeah, and that's tricky too, right? Because it's like once we observe something else, doesn't it become natural? Like, the term supernatural. So, like, what people call ghosts supernatural. Like, so say we learned about ghosts and understood ghosts, wouldn't they suddenly be part of the natural? So, I don't like to nitpick words, but I also like to be clear before we go on. You know what I mean?
Right. I agree totally.
Yeah.
So the reason that I asked that, though, is because when it comes down to when I speak to a lot of atheists regarding the origin of life, many times they refer to abiogenesis, which is the creation of life from non-life, as a natural process. But when we obviously don't observe it in nature, and we've never been able to recreate it in a laboratory. So I'm wondering why we refer to it as a natural process until it's proven to be a natural process.
So all we've ever observed when we get to the bottom of things are natural processes, and it's not like we can rule out unnatural processes. It's just we don't know anything about them, so we can't use them for explanatory power. So, do I know all the steps in the natural process? No, I don't. But you say it hasn't been observed. Well, a lot of the steps that would be required have been observed. Then you said something about reproducing it in the laboratory. I don't see the requirement there, right? Like, we're closer now to reproducing it in the laboratory, but the ancient Greeks were pretty far from that, but they still had a right to speculate about those kind of things, whether they could do it or not. I mean, like, life could be this huge mystery that we don't understand at all, but there's no reason we should start proposing explanations for it that are unobserved. Right. So all we've ever observed are natural processes.
So the thing that I'm bringing up, though, is falsifiability. It's part of the scientific process.
Right.
When all right, like, for instance, we observe that life exists, and some people might say, well, God created life. I would be one of those. And some people would say, well, abiogenesis occurred. Now, then, when we go on to examine these theories further, we see that biogenesis says that life brings forth life and brings forth after its own type. And that's pretty much what the biblical claim is, that God brought forth life and it brings forth after its own type. Now, then when we come to the, if for lack of a better term, I'm going to call it the atheistic claim of abiogenesis. when we try to put that to the test, every time we have tried to create life from non-life, it's failed. So
Right.
that's, you know,
Can I reply to a few things, please?
sure.
Yeah. So you said falsifiability. The abiogenesis theory is the one that's falsifiable, right? You could find anything but a natural process and it's falsified, right? But the God theory, which I wouldn't call a theory, but the God hypothesis or proposition is it's unfalsifiable. It's like as long as you don't find everything, people can just insert the God there and say everything we don't know is the God. As we keep uncovering more and more natural processes, more details about how it occurred, right? And then you said something about doing it in a lab. Well, no one's ever made a God do it in a lab either. I don't think that really applies. I don't think that's fair. There are a lot of things that are studied in science that are not the test tube experiment that you reproduce all the time, right? We learned that in school, but there are certain events that are not going to occur again, right? Like Earth history, natural history, and we still respect findings based on the merit of the evidence, and reproducibility is not really it's not really applicable.
I'll show you where I would disagree with that. Just beginning with God, and here I'll be defending some of my belief, which I guess that's fair. You know, it doesn't have to be just you defending your belief. But I would start with this. First of all, most of the world would say that they have had an experience with God. Now, I will grant
I'll
that,
agree with that.
yeah, I will grant that there are different religions involved here. Some are pagan, some are not, some are theistic. But this would give us a uh, I think a good reference to go by, though, and the probability that there is something out there that we would call God and that the atheist would say doesn't exist. But as far as I'm concerned, if somebody is trying to tell me personally, there is no God and that I believe in a fantasy and that I only believe it because I was brought up believing in a God, my rebuttal would be that I personally know this God, and there's millions of people that would make the same claim that we have spoken to God. God has literally spoken to some of us. Now, you may not understand the way that this happens, but we would swear to it and not be lying. And then I would point to,
I used to think that God had spoken to me too, and I would have sworn to it and not be lying.
well, I have physical evidence of God speaking to me. For
That would
instance,
be that would be good
yes,
to reproduce.
I seriously do, and I have physical evidence of a miracle that went along with this. And miracles, more than one. One was an instantly healed hand that happened in front of 5 other witnesses, and all 5 witnesses, including myself, making 6, we dedicated our lives to the Lord that day. But then I would also go on to say that biogenesis in itself, if we take life back to the first life, biogenesis itself would declare that there had to be a creator of life, some kind of life that brought forth life. But then, if you take the biblical God and you take the claims of the biblical God that are made in the Bible 2,000 and 3,500 years ago in the Old Testament and then the New Testament, some of the claims that are made by this God are actually now conclusions that science is drawing. And I can give you a good example of that. In a nutshell, we had the Big Bang, and the Big Bang kept getting falsified by flatness and horizon. So in 1981, Guth provided his paper on inflation, eternal inflation. And he states that he was attempting to answer the problem of flatness by postulating that there was a huge, extremely fast expansion, extremely hot and extremely fast beyond the speed of light, and that all of a sudden, for some unknown reason, it put on the brakes and it stopped expanding so quickly. It cooled down as it was still expanding, however, and that coolness, that quick coolness, allowed it to collapse in on itself, and it gave us a flat universe. But then he went on to describe, he said, this is a beautiful idea and it could possibly work, but the mathematics aren't working out, so we need to revise it. So then they added string theory to it and came out with it a couple years later, Guth and a team of scientists. And after that, when they tried to test it at CERN, about 30 years later, testing for supersymmetry, it failed over and over and over between 2013 and 2015. So then they started using a force that they refer to as dark matter and dark energy to fix all of the problems that they ran across.
Right, a placeholder.
Yeah, but it's not really a placeholder. They designate.
Well, it is. It's the it's first of all two different things. Dark matter is what we call. We see the effect of mass that is undetected. In other words, galaxies hold together. Spiral galaxies hold together better than they should, based on the mass that they should have. And so we call that missing mass that seems to be there by the structure of the galaxy. We call that dark matter. We don't know what it is. We have not detected it in any other way but to see that, like, these galaxies aren't acting like they should according to the mass they should have.
Yes.
Energy is kind of the same thing, meaning that the perfect vacuum of space seems to have more, not zero energy.
Yes.
We don't know the source of this energy. We don't know anything about it, but we're calling it dark energy because it doesn't look like zero when we look at the vacuum of space.
Yes. So
we agree, right?
Well, mostly I agree there, except that I would say they only postulate that these are two different forces. They don't know that they're not one force doing several different things here.
Well, but I do. One is a mass. The other one's a force.
What's that now?
They're not even both forces. One is mass. The other one is force.
Well, it's a force of some sort. They don't know if it's a extra gravitational force, which is caused by what they call dark matter. They don't know. What they recognize, what they observe, is actually the fact that the galaxies should have flown apart long ago.
Right.
And that for some reason there's something that's holding them together. Now, the interesting thing about this from the standpoint of a Christian is that in Colossians, 2,000 years before we ever heard of dark matter, God made a very interesting comment. And that comment, well, first of all, regarding the Big Bang, he says that he flung out the stars. Now, that was 3,500 years before we ever heard of Big Bang. But then 2,000 years before we ever heard of dark matter, he said that he is literally holding all of creation together. And that's what we actually observe, is that some invisible force.
I'm aware of all of these, right? And they seem like post hoc ways of taking the text and making it fit to discover.
Oh, no. I'm just taking it for exactly what it says. I'm not making it fit anything.
Well, I've heard a lot of these. I've heard these exact ones, and I've heard more from Muslims, and they tend to do it even better.
Well, The thing is, I don't have to do anything but accept what he said, and know
What
that
who said?
what God said.
Oh,
You see, this is the same God that speaks to me personally, has
right.
spoken to me personally, that I know exists. So I have no problem with this. I have no problem accepting the fact that he said 2,000 years before we knew that there was an invisible force holding these galaxies together. Uh, he said he was that invisible force that was holding these galaxies together.
I'm familiar with this. Before I even heard any of these types of comparisons, when I was a kid, I tried to make them myself. As a believer that was reading the Bible, the Big Bang itself, I tried to compare that to let there be light. And you can make these correlations.
Well,
However, I don't find them convincing. But you know what? Maybe your audience does. I believe you when you say that you do.
yeah, and well, there's more too. We
Right.
also have dark energy. Now, dark energy is said to be that force which is expanding our universe at an accelerated rate.
Accelerating the expansion, correct.
Yeah, so you see, this is dark energy. The force that we observe here is actually uh, it is going against the known laws of physics that we have before us. That says if anything, this expansion should be slowing over a period of time. And
Well, that's what's called a physics problem, right? So we always have several things that are going against our known physics. These are the things.
mhm.
These are
So
the things that keep physicists employed, right? Because they don't know everything. They find out they're wrong about things. They discover things.
mhm.
It's
Well,
not at any given time we're wrong about a bunch of stuff.
that's true.
Yeah.
That is true. I'll grant you that. But the point that I'm really getting to here, though, Leigh, is this. Um, you see, the Bible makes clear statements that were made way before we found out any of this. And now all of a sudden, we have scientists that are theoretical physicists, particle physicists, astrophysicists. They're all making the same observations that there is some sort of.
Can I ask you this, Eric? Why is it that it's only after the physicist makes the observation that someone says that's what the Bible said? How come it's never that someone says, here's what the Bible says, and then they go discover it based on the
Well,
Bible?
that does happen. It's that people will say this is what happened, and then later on, scientists will say this is what we've concluded. This has been in the Bible for 3,500 years.
I'm
So
aware of the history of the Bible.
what's that?
I'm aware of the history of the Bible.
What is the history of the Bible?
I said I'm aware of it.
Oh,
I'm
okay, okay.
aware. So if we're talking about, you're going back to the Torah, the Pentateuch, before it was even the Tanakh, right? We're going to some of the oldest books. We're talking. Well, you said 3,500 years. I would go 2,600 at least, and maybe up to. Well, maybe we get to your 3,500 number if we include oral tradition, but I don't think we're that far off.
Yeah. Well, what I find interesting is this: the Bible declares that an invisible, omnipresent force, an invisible, omnipresent, omnipotent force, is holding the universe and all creation together as it expands the universe. In the book of Isaiah and the book of Psalms, it literally says in at least 4 or 5 different places that I know of, literally, he says that he is present tense, stretching forth the universe like a curtain. In one place, it says like a tent.
Right. I'm aware of all of these, Eric.
Mm-hmm.
But
So,
which part says? I mean, I know about where the Bible says it's holding it together, but would that be gravity? Is that what you're saying is the counterpart for holding it together and stretching forth the
Well,
curtain is the expansion and the dark energy.
yeah. You see, to be stretching forth present tense, that implies the expansion of the universe. So what you have here is the scripture stating that he flung out the stars. He is stretching forth the universe like a curtain, and he is holding all creation together. And
Well, okay, Eric, what if I accepted that you told me like 10 of these and that you got all 10 of them right? All 10 of them correlate very well with what we know in science, right? So, um, don't you think that this is something that should have, like, wouldn't it be really improbable that you didn't have a bunch of these that correlated?
would it be probable that we didn't have a bunch of? I'm sorry, I don't know.
Well, you say here's this thing here's the way that the universe is expanding. Here's this description in the Bible. Wouldn't it be very improbable that we couldn't correlate a bunch of those? But then when we have things that like God made plants before he made the sun, you're not talking about that one.
Oh, well, you see, as far as I'm concerned, that's just a misunderstanding of Genesis chapter 1. Because if you look at Genesis chapter 1, even a lot of Christians mistake Genesis chapter 1, in my opinion. They take it as a 6 days of creation. But if you understand the Hebrew wording of the first and second verse, you come to understand that's not what it is at all. What it actually says in verse 1 is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But in verse 2, it says something that gives the rest of it a totally different meaning. It says in verse 2 that the earth became tohu and bohu. Now, when you interpret tohu and bohu, it means laid to waste and destroyed, or decimated and emptied. Now, then when you go to Isaiah chapter 45 and verse 18, God says, I didn't make the earth tohu. I didn't make the earth desolate or emptied. I didn't make it that way. I created it inhabited. Okay, so when we go back to Genesis chapter 1, then we see Isaiah told us he didn't create the earth emptied or desolate. So when we see verse 1 and verse 2, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, we have to understand he created it populated. And that verse 2 tells us it became, Hayah became, tohu and bohu, or destroyed and laid to waste. In other words, we had an extinction event. Jeremiah chapter 4 goes into that further, and it
I don't accept that. You take an extinction event and you say this describes that, and I just don't accept that it describes that. If I was looking for a potential like God candidate, I wouldn't be looking at Hebrew mythology anyway. It would be something that would have to be much better hidden, much like something that hasn't been falsified in many ways. Right?
Well, you see, that's the point, though. We do have evidence for the extinction events that this world has gone through. Ecclesiastes also backs it up.
You're pretending to argue against me when you're not, because I'll tell you all about the extinction events. What I'm saying is, I don't believe that the Bible describes these distinct extinction events.
Well,
you're going to tell me that this chapter of this book, this person says this, and that describes that extinction event, and I'm saying no, it doesn't describe that.
Well, do you know the Hebrew?
No.
Okay, well, Hayah, tohu, and bohu means became, destroyed, and laid waste and emptied. Okay.
Look, I'll take your word for it, and I still don't accept it.
Okay, you don't have to. Yeah. But that's the reason that I changed my view on what Genesis chapter 1 means, is because I've studied for like over 20 years with Hebrews, 25 actually. And plus I've learned a little bit of the Hebrew language. I don't speak it fluently, but I do use their lexicons and etc. And I've interpreted about probably at least half to three quarters, somewhere in between there, of the Bible back into the original language and then back into English so I could understand it. But getting back to what we're saying, you see, as far as I'm concerned, I can show God in science, and I can show science in the Scripture. But what we can't show.
I don't accept that you can show God in the science or Scripture.
Okay. What we can't show, though, is that life has ever come from non-life. You know Fred Hoyle?
Well, yeah, hold on. We can talk about Hoyle in a second, right? But so here's the idea. Imagine we're entirely ignorant about the origin of life, right? So the best thing to do is not propose an answer. That's to say, I don't know. I don't know is the best answer you can have when you don't know, right?
No.
So, but we do know a lot. We do know that the universe was incapable of having the type of life that we have now at some point, and we do know that we have life now.
Okay.
So that's enough to accept abiogenesis. There wasn't life, there is life. Abiogenesis occurred somewhere in between. Now,
Okay.
if you want to negate abiogenesis by classifying it as naturalistic, that's fine. It's fine. You can propose another cause that's not naturalistic, a god, whatever. That's fine. But first, you need to give evidence of the God before you can propose it as a candidate explanation.
I think I've just presented all kinds of evidence. For instance, the fact that I know God. God has healed me. He's answered my prayers. He's spoken to me, and millions.
I believe you. I believe you are sincere. Like I was sincere when I felt like I knew God.
And let me ask you something. How can you unknow God? Do you really think you knew God?
Yeah. So you want to know about like how I came out of it, or
I'm just wondering. You're giving me a strong implication that you, quote unquote, knew God, and then all of a sudden it's like you.
Okay, to be clear, I don't think I ever knew God.
Okay.
There was a time in my life that I thought I did.
And what made you think you did?
I believe it was indoctrination. Starting from a baby, I was told about God, and I was told about God by people I loved very much, like my grandparents that I love. And
Okay, so
everything they say must be right because they're my beautiful grandparents and they want the best for me.
Right now,
I read the Bible.
You brought up your grandparents. You knew your grandparents, right?
I knew all four of my grandparents. I'm very fortunate that way, and I knew two great grandmothers as well.
Now, is there ever going to come a time, provided that your mental state stays clear, will you ever see a time where you don't know your grandparents? Will you ever unknow them?
No. I mean, yeah.
Will you ever come to the point?
Barring dementia, no.
Okay, so you'll never come to the point where you'll figure they were a figment of your imagination.
Correct.
Okay.
Very much unlike the God that I thought I experienced.
So you didn't really know God. You didn't really experience God.
I thought I did.
Well, how would you?
Yeah, you're correct. I did not really experience God.
Okay. So you see, there's a difference there. I've really experienced God. For me to deny God would be like denying my parents, denying my grandparents.
Yeah, Eric, the reason I kind of want to cut this short because I don't want to insult you, and I want you to understand that you sound very sincere, and I believe you, and there's no part of me that wants to argue your personal experience with you.
Well, I can appreciate that.
You're the expert on your personal experience, not me.
What I'd like to show you, Leigh, is this: the natural, the nature of my belief and the natural foundations of my belief. How my belief is natural. The belief in God is natural. that life coming from God is natural. God spreading forth the universe is natural.
I think we can find common ground on the language. Do you remember what I said earlier about if something is discovered, it becomes part of the natural?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, I could totally accept your God, your concept to me, but it's real to you. I can accept that as part of the natural. Like you'll
Well,
be the father of the natural.
what I'd like for you to further consider, and if you've got to go, I understand, but maybe we can talk about this further.
Absolutely. I would like to speak longer. I would like to speak for a few more minutes, have a piss, make a drink, and continue, if you don't mind.
And that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
Another thing that I want to accomplish, and I hope you don't take this wrong or offensively or anything, because I certainly don't mean it offensively, but I just want to prove to you that the things that the atheist accepts as real, like abiogenesis, is not natural. It's in fact unnatural. It's an unnatural process.
Yes. Okay. So I like where you're going with this. I'm going to assure you that I'm very thick skinned and I actually appreciate you. I've said some things to you that some people take very offensively, and you've been very cool with it. So I think we're in a good place. Do you mind? Can you entertain your audience for a minute while I go use the restroom and grab a drink?
Sure, sure.
Can you do that? Okay.
Sure.
And when we get back, we can talk about what is unnatural about what an atheist believes.
That's cool. That's cool.
Cool. All right. I'll be right back, Eric.
Okay. And once again, with me is Leigh Hunt. And hey, I'm glad to see we've got some people in the audience that are really enjoying this. Simon, good to see you. God bless you, my friend. And Jesus is coming. God bless you, my friend. It's good to see you. I'm very glad that you're here. So, yeah, tonight we have with us an atheist. He's not a bad guy. Atheism doesn't mean terrible person. We disagree, and I would like to show him the what I consider the errors of atheism and how it's an unnatural belief. They're forced to believe in unnatural things that we just don't observe, things that are kind of absurdities in the long run. So hopefully we can come away with at least Mr. Hunt here, Leigh, at least with him giving credence to the possibility that some of the things that he believes may be wrong, and nudge him towards believing what is natural. Let's face it, if God is the creator of all that is, and those of us who are Christian believe that he is, then this makes God the most natural thing in the universe. And creation then becomes not a supernatural occurrence, but a natural occurrence. Just like it's natural for a male and a female to have children, it's natural that a living God would bring forth living, conscious, intelligent beings eventually.
Okay.
And this is the premise that we go by here.
Hey, Eric, I'm back.
And I'm going to, so, what I would like to consider, what I'd like for you to possibly consider is this, Leigh, if you wouldn't mind. Consider the thought that the things that the atheist who is going to try to explain life, if an atheist is going to try to explain life, they have to more or less accept what you're accepting, abiogenesis.
Hold on a sec. Before you start, I just want to say no atheist is obligated to explain life, right? They could just say, I don't know anything about life. I just don't believe in a God.
Well, that's true. I'm just saying that if an atheist was to try to explain life, you basically have two choices between abiogenesis and creation, special creation. And I think you would agree with this, that one of two things had to always exist: either a living, breathing, and intelligent, conscious creator had to always exist, or this thing that we call singularity, whatever it was, had to have always existed. And then one of those two things had to be the creator of all that is.
I do not accept that those are the only two possibilities, and
Okay,
I don't need to name any. I just
okay,
there's no reason for me to accept that that's an exhaustive list, even
okay,
if those are the only two I know. But I can name some, right? So like it's uh, time began when the expansion began, right? I'm just making stuff up, pulling out of my butt. Um, Time was decelerated to infinitely decelerated as we got closer to the singularity. Uh, there has been a metaverse that has always existed, and our universe popped out of that. So like I don't endorse any of these. I'm just saying, like just off the top of my head, I can come up with some alternatives, and I don't accept a list of two options as exhaustive.
right. Well, to accept a metaverse that existed before, whereby our universe was ejected out of it somehow, or
Yeah,
like Dr. Alan Guth postulated, a vast field of bubble universes when they.
right. I don't. I entertain all those. I find them interesting, but I don't accept any of them.
Yeah, you see, here's the thing, though. It all leads us back to any other options, leads us back to some sort of infinite regression, I believe. You know,
Right,
okay.
and I don't accept that that's impossible.
Okay. Well, I think an infinite, most people accept the fact that an infinite regression is kind of an absurdity. Uh,
I
that
I
there,
find people try to claim it's absurd by saying, "How would you ever get to now?" And it's like, well, you know, we are at now, and there doesn't need to be a how. And things in physics, when they get outside of our scale, our speed, our mass, they get so counterintuitive that things that make sense to us in our known universe, like causality, just the physics, our forces that we know, to think that they would make sense. Like on the quantum level, particles aren't really particles, but we call them particles just to make them something we can diagram.
yeah. Well,
So it's just it's. I think it's audacious for humans to think they can picture these things. And I think even the best physicists in the world would tell you they can't picture them. They can just show you how the math works.
well, to make a long story short, what I believe is that one of two things had to always exist. Okay. And one of them is a God, and the other is the singularity, or wherever this universe came from. One of the two had to always exist. And I accept the fact that I would accept that God has always existed. And I'm going to tell you why. You see, in one case, here's what nature shows us. Now, the book of Romans tells us that nature itself tells us all about a God, even right down to the eternal Godhead and his power. So, if this is true, and I believe it is, then I should be able to look at nature and see we have a creator. So, when I look at nature, here's what I see.
I agree.
Yeah, only living, conscious, intelligent beings create living, conscious, intelligent beings.
I agree.
Okay. And life only comes from life. That's what we observe.
I agree.
Okay. So if we take this all the way back, then we can safely assume, that the original life on Earth was created by some other life, maybe some life that we don't understand. But when we get into quantum physics now,
Can I interrupt there, please?
yeah, sure. But let me draw
So,
one little last part out to so you understand where I'm coming from
okay,
exactly.
I just want to address that you said the original life came from life. I really want to address that, but go ahead.
Okay. So the original life on Earth, came from life, which would have been God. But you see, here's something: quantum physics is a very mystifying field. We have certain facts that we have to deal with that just don't make sense in the real world. In the like the double slit experiment, for instance.
Right.
Uh,
It's counterintuitive.
yeah, the double slit experiment is a very weird thing, and we have a lot of things going on in quantum physics that their explanations. I think many of them are absurd. Now, some people look at Schrodinger's cat,
Yeah.
and they actually believe that Schrodinger was serious when he talked about his cat thought exercise. But what he was trying to do, he wasn't trying to explain quantum physics. He was trying to show how absurd he thought a lot of the theories and explanations for quantum physics were. He thought it was an absurdity, and he used his Schrodinger's cat as an example of that absurdity.
Right. These people are constantly working well past the edge of human absurdity,
Yeah,
where our intuition no longer works.
right. But
Yeah.
the facts that the actual observances that we have are these. We observe that when you fire uh, these particles, it doesn't matter if it's a photon, it doesn't matter if it's a particle, it doesn't matter if it doesn't matter if it's a molecule up to 5,000 atoms large. When you fire these things through, when they're observed, they act like particles or matter. When they're unobserved,
Like they make a wave pattern on, on
exactly,
on the film.
exactly,
Right.
they act more like energy.
Right.
In other words, so
Right.
uh,
I like Niels Bohr is a really cool dude, and I just accept that this stuff's above my pay grade.
yeah,
Right.
well,
And they've got to use language. Like I think we're limited by language, right? Just the words particle and wave and all that. Waves are something we see happen with a rope or on the ocean. Particles are balls bouncing around. We see these things. It allows people to communicate ideas, but in the end, those words like flounder when they're really trying to explain the actual concept.
yeah, well, when um, when we look at these things, though, and then we look at the other things, the facts of science, like the forces that they observe that they call dark matter and dark energy. I think that we have an explanation for everything. I think that science is literally detecting God. And that first life, here's what we observe, okay? When we have, when we're not observing these particles or whatever in the double slit experiment, they act like waves. But when we observe them, they act like matter or particles.
Gotcha.
So, in other words, what really exists, the source behind everything, it seems to me that I could say this safely, that it seems, and oh gosh, what was his name? Gates, that came up with the supersymmetry and the mathematical formula that he found in
I'm not
supersymmetry.
good at names.
Yeah, in other words, what he found was that there is a literal computer program underlying the construct of the universe, and it's a literal
I
computer program.
don't accept that there's a literal computer program. I accept that someone could use that as an analogy to explain something, but I do not accept there's a literal computer program. And I want to go back to where you said the life on Earth came from other life, because we've got that's happening on a more macro scale, right? Now we're talking about hydrogen bonds between complex, organic molecules, and we're starting to get up to things we can see where our common sense actually does apply, right? Well, it's not when we're talking about physics, but when we're talking about life. And for life to arise, we got to understand that even today, with lots of existing things on Earth, people still argue about if they're life or not, right? Like a virus, a prion, um, certain things meet certain criteria, and scientists argue about it, and it's not really resolvable, right? Because it's almost arbitrary where you draw a line as to where life begins. There's, a certain type of replication must occur. By my definition, that's life, but I don't accept your definition, blah, blah, blah. But if you look at self-replicating molecules, things falling into the state of the least energy. Now we're going back to your physics, but it gets up to, even with the valence shells of an atom, right? You have the electrons finding the lowest state of energy. And it's the same, it would happen, in my cup of ice, right? I mean, they're going to shake their way down to the best, easiest configuration.
Mm-hmm.
Things just kind of find their way. A landslide is going to be at an angle of repose based on the size of the particles in the landslide, based on the gravity of where it happens. Right. Mm-hmm. So these are things that don't require an intelligence, and they're going to happen spontaneously. It would take an intelligence to stop them from happening.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
How do you believe the double slit experiment directly affects you? What do you think that tells you about you personally?
Because I think it doesn't affect people necessarily, unless they're using technology based on it. But let's go back. Say we're living in the 1500s. It doesn't affect us at all, right? But now I live now, and I know about it, and a lot of advancements have been made because of it. So it affects me in that way.
Well, wouldn't you agree, though, that over the years they've been able to go from single photons to particles to larger and larger particles, and then atoms, and then molecules, and then larger and larger molecules? Doesn't it seem like the limits that we once thought were there are not really there, and the bigger we go, the more we try, the more that it proves to be true, and it holds true no matter the size?
You said a lot there. A lot of it made sense. So yes, humanity has a habit of imposing limits that are not actually there, and then discovering that they really aren't. There are no limits in that case, right? But I don't know. I'm not sure what you're getting at.
Well, what I'm getting at is this. I'm suggesting that the scriptures tell us that God is a spirit. Now, most Christians would define, if we had to define a spirit, we would define it as an energy rather than matter or a particle. Okay, we would define it as energy.
Okay, that's your definition. I accept it. Mm-hmm. I don't accept spirit as anything, right? If you want to call a spirit energy, yes, but I do not accept that a spirit is energy.
Okay, well, I'm just saying most Christians would.
I accept that.
So, but if I'm right and you're wrong, which is a possibility, if I'm right and you're wrong, then the real you is a spirit, and you are encased in more or less an illusion if you consider the double slit experiment.
The ghost in the machine.
Yeah.
Are you saying dualism? This is what we're talking about?
Yeah, idealism So
okay.
you would be composed, the real you, your consciousness, your intelligence, your mind, that would be part of your spirit. And what is called your body is merely the illusion that is encasing all of that.
I'm aware of the concept.
Yeah, which is going to drop off one day. But if that's the case, and your spirit is energy, then your spirit would be more or less eternal, because energy, we don't create it, we don't destroy it. It can convert.
I do not accept that, because I believe that this me that you're talking to right now is a current assembly subatomic particles, whatever you want to call it, and it's functioning in a certain way. And once it stops functioning in that way, there's no need.
Well, a lot of people would disagree with that, and there's some studies that would disagree with that, that talk about life after death. Um,
Right?
we look forward to a
A lot of people
resurrection,
saying near-death experiences and all that.
right? Now, um, you know, if I could get if I could get you to understand that I'm not just talking about, I'm not just referencing God as a theological subject from science,
Yeah,
using science to refer to a theological subject. I'm using science to draw out what I know about an what I could call an individual, an omnipresent, invisible force
yeah.
pervades this universe.
Hey,
And it's
can I just say something philosophical that just, I don't know, you may not want to hear it, but so I think it's really special that this configuration that is you and I exist at the same time. So the finite nature of us, that we can actually interact. And I said something like that at my father's eulogy, that 100 billion people have lived and died that never got to meet the guy. Maybe a few thousand actually got to know him. And we're very, very lucky, you know. And so I'm glad to be here. And I wanted to say, I think I agree with you that the energy that we are made of is eternal. However, I just think it will be doing other things besides being me, But it's nice to meet you, Eric, and cheers.
All right, it's good. It's good to meet you. I want to ask you a question, and I hope you don't take any offense to this. But
I dare you to offend me. I challenge you to offend me, Eric.
okay, was your father a religious man?
He was.
He was.
Yeah.
So, would you say he was? He would be one that was expecting to enjoy an afterlife with God.
Yes, he was.
Okay. What I'd like for you to consider, and Leigh, I'm not going to keep you here all night, and you can come back anytime you wish.
Yeah.
You just holler at me and
You
tell.
can do this again.
Yeah, you tell me anytime you want to. I'll bring you one. But I'd like for you to consider the possibility that maybe your dad is right, and that maybe science does point out that certain modes of belief.
Okay, little bit of offense right there. I'm a little offended. You'd think I wouldn't have considered that. Like I've considered that my whole life. You know what I mean?
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
And you know, if I could just point you
Yeah.
in a direction where you consider that maybe some of these beliefs, these godless beliefs, the atheistic beliefs, are kind of absurd and that they're unnatural, and then point
I
you.
think there's a lot more, right? Because you only got to like one or two of those, and I think there's a good reason for us to do this again, so we can go through more of these ideas that are irrational. Why it's irrational to be an atheist, right? That's a cool subject. I would like to participate. And gosh, what was I going to say? It's something about my dad. Oh yeah.
Yes,
So
yes,
in a way, you are filling in for him because he what we're doing right now is and I have some really good friends that are pretty good at this kind of stuff, but he was my favorite. He was my and you're not as good as him. None of my best friends are as good as him, but you're pretty good, and I appreciate it. It's better than nothing. Nothing will ever replace Dad. But these kind of discussions are like what Dad and I like to do. And the fact that we disagreed was actually very neat. Because if we agreed, we would have a lot less to talk about.
yeah,
You know?
yes, that's true. Well, I appreciate that too, very much. Thank you. And
Yeah.
we'll do that. We'll stay in touch. Send me a friend request. I'll
Yeah,
accept.
I would like to get a copy of this. Can I go to your YouTube channel and then share it? Like, can I share it to my own stuff?
Well, that's cool. Okay, I'll be happy to. And
I mean, I could just go to your channel and then link it. I like to share it in my Facebook, stuff
well,
like that. Send it to a friend in a private message.
I'll be happy to do that. And I'll in the thread that we were talking in, Leigh, I'll put a link to this particular video, and
That's really cool. Post it in that room, please.
and I'll put a link to my channel for you. And
now, I hope we get good comments from the people in that group.
Yeah, and next time, anytime you would like to come on, if I have a spare day and I don't hear from you, I'll offer. But if you have some spare time and want to come back on, you can ask anytime, and I'll be happy to bring you on.
Thanks. And with my work schedule, this is about the time of day that we could do this most days of the week.
Well,
I'm missing my Dodger game to talk to you right now, so you should be flattered by that.
Well, I'm honored, man. Thank you. and
baseball is my religion, by the way.
Yeah. And guys, I would open this up to more comments, but I don't want to keep Leigh on here all evening, and I don't want him to feel like he has to answer a bunch of questions right now. But
I just want to say you're a cool dude, Eric. I didn't accept. Like I just kept saying, I don't accept. And you never got mad at me. You never called me, stubborn or stupid or anything. You just, I really appreciate that.
Well, that's quite all right, buddy. You don't have to accept anything I say, man. It's a discussion. So I appreciate you, and I appreciate your attitude as well. So God bless everybody tonight, and God bless you, Leigh, and thank you very much for a great conversation.
And I appreciate it when people say God bless me, even though it doesn't mean much to me. I know it means something to you, so thank you.
Well, I'm glad you take it in a great
spirit. I'll even say it. God bless you too, Eric.
Well, thank you. And Jesus is coming. Simon, my friends, I love you guys, and everybody else that popped in. If I missed you, I'm sorry. Well, God bless you guys. Love you all very much. And this is Eric, and this is Mr. Leigh Hunt, my new friend. You have a great day. We say goodbye. Have a great night.